The city skyline glimmered with lights that stretched as far as the eye could see. In the tallest building on the topmost floor, a penthouse shimmered with wealth and extravagance. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings, reflecting colors across the polished marble floors. Expensive paintings adorned the walls, each carefully chosen, each a statement of taste, power, and wealth. The air smelled faintly of fresh flowers, and the soft sound of a fountain in the corner created a serene background in a room filled with chatter, laughter, and clinking glasses. The penthouse was hosting one of its regular gatherings, an evening of conversation, music, and amusement, and tonight, the guests were some of the city's most influential figures. Men in tailored suits and women in glittering gowns moved gracefully across the room. Servants floated silently among them, offering trays of champagne and delicacies that looked more like art than food. Amid the elegance and the wealth, there was an air of playful tension, a kind of energy that came from knowing that anything could happen in a place where money and power made almost anything possible. In the corner, near the grand piano, a young woman moved quietly, carrying a bucket and cleaning cloths. She had been a part of this world, or at least this building, for several years, though she had never really been part of the world of chandeliers and fine dresses. Her name was Clara. She wore simple clothes, neat and practical, and her hair was tied back to keep it out of her way. She moved carefully, making sure to clean every surface without drawing attention to herself. The guests often ignored her presence, assuming she was invisible, just part of the background that made the space shine. She did not mind. She liked her work because it gave her purpose, and in its quiet way, she could enjoy the beauty of the penthouse without the pressures of the elite crowd. On this particular night, Clara was wiping down the edge of the grand piano, her hands moving quickly but gently over the polished wood. She had grown up with music. Her childhood had been filled with piano lessons, the gentle guidance of a teacher who had seen talent in her small, careful hands. Music had always been her escape, her comfort, and her secret joy. But life had taken her down other paths. She had stopped formal lessons long ago, and the piano in this penthouse was more a piece of furniture for the wealthy than an instrument to her. Yet as her fingers brushed across the keys, memories of those days of music that had once filled her small childhood home flared to life. The billionaire of the evening, a man whose name alone could command attention in any room, was seated at the far end of the room with a few close friends. His reputation was well known, sharp, unpredictable, and often cruelly amusing. He loved to challenge people, to see their reactions when pushed into unexpected situations. He had wealth that few could imagine, yet he found pleasure not in quiet solitude but in the spectacle of others' astonishment. Tonight his eyes, dark and piercing, had wandered across the room and landed on Clara. He had noticed the way she moved, quiet but confident in her task, her focus on her work. A mischievous smile spread across his face. He called out, his voice smooth, carrying easily through the murmurs of conversation. "Hey, you there with the cleaning cloth. Come here." The room seemed to pause for a moment, guests turning to look at the scene that was about to unfold. Clara froze. She had been unnoticed, but now all eyes were on her. Her heart thumped in her chest. She moved slowly toward him, unsure of what he wanted, aware of the curious gazes following her. When she reached him, he looked her over quickly, as if assessing not only her appearance but her potential. Then with a dramatic gesture, he pointed to the grand piano behind her. "If you can play this piano as well as I imagine, I'll marry you," he said, his tone both teasing and challenging. Laughter erupted around the room. Guests shook their heads and whispered to one another. Some thought it was a cruel joke, a wealthy man amusing himself at the expense of someone far below his social class. Others leaned forward, curious to see how Clara would respond. Clara's cheeks flushed, and for a moment she didn't know what to say. The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. She had never been addressed in such a way, not by strangers and certainly not by someone so powerful, and yet she felt a strange calm inside her, a flicker of recognition that this moment was unlike any she had ever experienced. She smiled politely, not out of agreement, but because she could not think of what else to do. I don't think I could play well enough," she murmured softly, almost apologetically. Her voice was quiet, but it carried a strange confidence, as if she knew the truth of her own ability even while pretending not to. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, amusement clear in his eyes. "Oh, come now. Surely a girl who spends so much time cleaning my piano must have touched it before. Give it a try." Just one song." He gestured broadly, inviting the attention of the guests to focus on her. The crowd leaned forward. Drinks were forgotten. Conversations paused. Something about the challenge, absurd as it was, had captured their imagination. Clara's hands hovered above the keys. She remembered the feel of them from childhood. The smooth black and white surfaces under her fingertips. The way her fingers had once flown over them with ease. She remembered the hours she had spent learning scales. The songs that had made her heart race with excitement. A flicker of doubt appeared. Could she really do this now after years of silence? Could she rise to a challenge presented not in a music hall or a lesson, but in front of a crowd that expected nothing less than a spectacle? The room held its breath. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, letting her memory carry her back to that small room where she had first learned to play. She could see the small stool she had sat on, the sheet music that had once been her guide, the teacher's gentle hands correcting her posture. Slowly, she placed her fingers on the keys. The notes that emerged were soft at first, uncertain, but gradually gained confidence. They were simple at first, scales that she had played hundreds of times, but as her hands remembered their old skill, the music began to take shape, richer and more fluid than she had expected. The guests leaned in, surprised at the sound that now filled the penthouse. It was not loud or showy, but delicate and beautiful. There was a precision and emotion that had been missing from the laughter and chatter, a quiet reminder that talent often hides in places no one notices. The billionaire's eyebrows rose, and for a moment he was silent, the smirk on his face replaced by something closer to astonishment. He had expected hesitation, mistakes, perhaps even embarrassment. Instead, what he heard was music that seemed to speak of a life lived quietly, carefully, yet with deep feeling. Clara continued to play, lost in the flow of her own memory and emotion. She forgot the audience, the penthouse, the laughter, and the wealth around her. The room seemed to fade, leaving only her and the piano, the notes flowing like a river through her fingers. She played a melody she had long forgotten, a song her mother had once hummed to her as a child. It was tender, filled with nostalgia and warmth. The billionaire watched, unable to look away, caught between disbelief and admiration. He had often seen people perform, seen entertainers charm crowds, but he had never witnessed something that felt so real, so unforced, and yet so perfect. As the last note lingered in the air, Clara lifted her hands and looked up. The room was silent. The guests were still, many with mouths slightly open, unsure how to respond. The billionaire, for the first time in years, seemed lost for words. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by an expression that was almost human, almost vulnerable. He cleared his throat, attempting to regain composure, but it was clear that the evening had taken a turn he had not anticipated. Clara stepped back, uncertain what to expect. She had played from memory, from emotion, from a place deep inside her that she had not visited in years. She had not meant to impress, to dazzle, or to win a bet. She had only played because the piano had called her back, because the music had refused to be ignored. And now, as she looked around at the faces of the wealthy and powerful, she realized that something subtle but significant had shifted. The billionaire finally spoke, his voice quieter than before, tinged with an emotion few had ever heard from him. I did not expect that," he said. The guests murmured in agreement, some nodding, others whispering in astonishment. Clara offered a polite smile, unsure if she had succeeded in any way, yet feeling a strange sense of triumph that had nothing to do with wealth or recognition. It was the triumph of being true to herself, of reconnecting with a talent that had never left her, no matter how much life had tried to bury it. The evening continued, but something had changed in the air. Clara returned to her duties, though her movements were lighter now, almost as if the music she had played had lifted some invisible weight. The billionaire watched her from a distance, a new curiosity flickering in his eyes. He had thrown out the challenge as a joke, a moment of entertainment. But what he had seen was something that defied his expectations, something that made him rethink what he thought he knew about people, about talent, about life itself. And in that penthouse, amidst the chandeliers, the laughter, and the glittering gowns, a quiet transformation had begun, one that would not be obvious immediately, but one that would change both Clara and the billionaire in ways neither of them could yet imagine. After the evening's unexpected performance, the penthouse slowly emptied. Guests left in small groups, talking quietly among themselves, some still shaking their heads in disbelief. Clara, carrying her cleaning supplies, returned to her chores, but her mind was far from the polished floors and shining surfaces. She could still feel the piano keys beneath her fingers, the vibrations of the notes as they had traveled through her hands and into the room. The memory was alive, almost tangible, and she realized that she had not felt so connected to herself in years. She moved quietly, carefully placing her bucket and cloth down in the storage corner. The chandeliers above reflected off the floors, and for a moment the penthouse felt empty, silent, as if it were holding its breath. Clara's heart was still beating fast. She had expected embarrassment, laughter, or at most polite applause. But what had happened was different. The music had felt real, honest, and it had touched people. Even the billionaire, whose expression had been unreadable at first, but then something had changed. Clara went home that night, walking slowly through the quiet streets. The city was alive with lights and sounds, but she felt detached from it, as if the night around her existed in a different world. Her thoughts kept returning to the piano, to the melody she had played, to the feeling of the keys beneath her fingers. It was like rediscovering an old friend she had lost long ago, a friend who had waited patiently for her return. She wondered if she should try again, if she should let herself play more, but doubt crept in. She had been a child playing at home. This was a grand piano, in a grand room in front of people who had everything she had never known. Could she really step into that world? The next morning, she returned to the penthouse. The billionaire had already arrived, moving through the rooms with his usual confidence. His presence was imposing, yet this time there was a new curiosity in his eyes when they landed on Clara. He did not speak immediately, just watched her work quietly. Clara felt a mixture of unease and pride. She had expected ridicule, but instead, there was an unspoken acknowledgement. It was small, subtle, but it told her that he had noticed, that he had been affected by what she had played. Later in the day, a soft knock came at the door of the cleaning supply closet where Clara kept her things. She opened it cautiously, and the billionaire stood there holding a folder in his hand. He looked less like the man of power everyone feared and more like someone curious about something he did not understand. "I want to hear you play again," he said simply. His tone carried no arrogance this time, only interest. Clara blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Again?" she asked softly, hesitating. I'm not sure I should." "Not for me," he replied, stepping aside. "For everyone else. Some guests may be coming over tonight. I want them to see what I saw." There was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, as if he himself was not sure how this would go, but he wanted it. Clara took a deep breath. The thought of playing again in front of others was terrifying and thrilling at the same time. But deep down, she felt a pull she could not ignore. When evening arrived, the penthouse was filled once more with the hum of conversations, laughter, and the soft clinking of glasses. Clara approached the piano slowly. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the keys, but this time the trembling was mingled with excitement. She could see the billionaire standing a short distance away, watching her intently. There was no smirk, no mocking tone, only expectation and quiet encouragement. Clara began to play. The first few notes were soft, almost hesitant, but soon her fingers found their rhythm. She played a piece that came from her memory, a melody she had composed herself years ago but never shared with anyone. The sound filled the room, gentle and flowing, wrapping around the guests like a warm embrace. Conversation stopped. Eyes widened. A few guests whispered in amazement, trying not to disturb the music but unable to contain their astonishment. The music was more than notes. It was a story. It told of quiet mornings, of hope and sorrow, of memories that lingered and dreams that had never died. Clara lost herself in the melody, and with each chord the world around her seemed to fade. The chandelier lights reflected in her eyes. The polished floor mirrored her movements, and the room became a place where time had no meaning. The billionaire watched, mesmerized. He had seen musicians perform many times in grand halls with thunderous applause and critics' notes. But this was different. There was no performance here, no attempt to impress with flashy technique or dramatic flair. This was music born of life, honest and unpolished in the best way. He felt something stir inside him, something he had not experienced in a long time: awe. He could see that Clara was not performing for him, not for the guests, not even for the recognition. She was playing because it was who she was, because the music was a part of her. As the melody continued, Some guests shifted in their seats, leaning closer to hear better. Others stood silently, unable to tear their eyes away. The room was filled with a rare kind of magic, one that comes when someone shares a hidden part of themselves without fear or expectation. Clara's fingers moved with grace and certainty, each note intentional, each chord carrying emotion. She could feel the power of the music in her chest, in her mind, and she realized that this moment was no longer about the challenge or the bet. It was about something deeper, something that connected her to everyone in the room. The piece came to a gentle close, a lingering note that seemed to hang in the air long after her hands had left the keys. Silence followed, the kind of silence that is heavy, not uncomfortable, but full of shared recognition. Guests slowly began to clap, softly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Some whispered their astonishment to one another. Others turned to the billionaire, whose expression had changed from amusement to genuine wonder. He had never imagined that someone so ordinary in appearance could possess such extraordinary skill. Clara stepped back from the piano, her heart racing, her hands warm from the touch of the keys. She looked around at the faces of the guests. There was respect, admiration, and surprise. And there was him, the billionaire, whose eyes reflected a mixture of disbelief and something else, something she could not yet name. He walked slowly toward her, his usual confident stride tempered by the astonishment he still could not hide. "You were incredible," he said finally. His voice was quieter than usual, less commanding, more honest. "I didn't expect that." Clara smiled softly, unsure how to respond. "I just played what I remembered," she said. Her voice was calm, but inside a rush of emotions tumbled through her. Pride, relief, excitement, and a little fear all mixed together. She had faced the challenge not as a joke, not as a performance, but as herself. And now, the room recognized her not as a cleaner, not as someone invisible, but as someone who carried talent, skill, and heart. The billionaire nodded slowly. "I see that now," he said, his usual arrogance tempered. He paused, then asked, "Would you play again? For a few more guests? For a small gathering tomorrow evening?" Clara hesitated, but the thought of playing again was no longer frightening. It was exciting. She realized that the music had found its way back into her life, and maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something she had been waiting for all along. The next day, Clara returned to the penthouse earlier than usual. The rooms were quiet, the chandeliers sparkling in the morning sun. She approached the piano, her fingers brushing lightly over the keys. The notes responded, smooth and familiar. She remembered the melody from the night before, then added a few variations, letting her own emotions guide her. The music filled the empty room, echoing softly against the walls, and she felt a connection she had not felt in years. Later, the billionaire arrived. He entered quietly, standing at the edge of the room, watching her play. There was no teasing, no challenge, only a quiet admiration that made her fingers move with even more confidence. She was no longer playing for him, no longer responding to a bet. She was playing for herself, for the music, and for the way it connected them all silently, through the shared language of sound. When she finished, he finally spoke, his voice a little warmer than before. "You have a gift," he said. "A rare one. And not just the skill, but the way you play. It's something I've never seen before." Clara's cheeks flushed slightly. She had never expected recognition from someone like him, yet his words were sincere, honest, and in that honesty, she felt the value of her own talent reflected back at her. From that moment on, things began to shift. Clara no longer felt invisible in the penthouse. The guests, the staff, even the billionaire himself began to notice her in ways they had not before. She was still quiet, still humble, but there was a new confidence in her movements, a quiet pride in the way she carried herself. And the music, once a distant memory, was now a living, breathing part of her life again, a force that drew people toward her without effort, simply because it was real. Even the billionaire found himself thinking differently. He had challenged her as a joke, expecting nothing. But what he had witnessed was not just talent. It was a glimpse into someone's soul, a reminder that wealth and status were meaningless in the face of real skill, dedication, and heart. He really said that Clara was unlike anyone he had ever met, and that thought lingered with him, growing stronger with each day. By the time the small gathering arrived the next evening, Clara was ready. She had practiced quietly, not to impress but to honor the music that had returned to her. And when the guests arrived and she played again, it was not just a performance, it was a statement. A reminder that talent can hide in unexpected places, and that true beauty often comes without warning, in ways that leave everyone changed. The billionaire watched her not with amusement or expectation, but with genuine admiration, and for the first time, he wondered if the challenge he had thrown out so carelessly might have led him to something more profound than he had ever imagined. The next few days felt different for Clara. The air in the penthouse seemed lighter, as if the sound of her music had changed something in the very walls. The guests who once walked past her without a glance now greeted her with smiles and small compliments. Even the other staff members looked at her with a new kind of respect. Some whispered among themselves about how someone so quiet could play like that. Others simply watched her, as if seeing her for the first time. But the one who had changed the most was the billionaire. He was no longer the man who threw out careless challenges for amusement. Something about Clara's music had touched him, had reached a part of him that he hadn't realized was still capable of feeling. He had grown up in a world where everything could be bought: luxury, attention, loyalty, but when Clara played, he had seen something that could not be purchased, something raw and real. He found himself thinking about her at odd times, during meetings, in his car, even when he tried to sleep. It wasn't just her music. It was the calmness she carried, the way she moved through life without needing to be noticed. He admired that quiet strength, that sense of peace that seemed so foreign to his fast, restless world. Clara, however, had no idea what was stirring in his thoughts. She simply continued her work, grateful for the chance to play again whenever he asked. She loved those moments, early mornings when the penthouse was empty and sunlight fell across the piano keys, or late evenings when she could lose herself in melodies while the world outside slowed down. For her, music wasn't about recognition. It was about emotion, about connection. One morning, as she arrived at work, she found a small envelope waiting for her on the counter. It had her name written in neat handwriting, something she rarely saw. Inside was a note from the billionaire. "There's a gathering tonight. I would like you to play again. This time choose whatever piece speaks to you most." Clara read it twice, feeling a mix of surprise and nervousness. Each time she played, it drew more attention, not just from guests, but from the media as well. Word had started spreading about the mysterious cleaner with the golden hands. She didn't know how to feel about it. Fame was never something she wanted. It made her uneasy, but she couldn't deny that the piano had brought her a sense of freedom she had long missed. That evening, the penthouse was filled again, this time with even more guests. There were reporters, photographers, and people who had come purely out of curiosity. The billionaire moved among them with his usual confidence, though his eyes often drifted toward the piano, waiting for her to begin. When Clara finally took her seat, the room grew quiet. She felt the familiar weight of nerves pressing against her chest. But then she looked at the piano, at the black and white keys that had been her companions through joy and sorrow, and the fear melted away. She placed her fingers gently on the keys and began to play. The melody she chose that night was soft and haunting, a piece she had written herself long ago but never shared. It spoke of struggle, of loss, but also of hope, the kind that flickers quietly in dark moments but never dies. As she played, the crowd disappeared in her mind. There was only the sound, rising and falling like the rhythm of her own heart. The billionaire stood still, transfixed. The notes seemed to echo in his chest. He had been to countless concerts, had paid fortunes to hear world-famous musicians, but nothing compared to this. It wasn't the skill alone, it was the emotion behind it. Clara wasn't performing. She was sharing a piece of her soul. When the final note faded, the room was silent for a long moment. Then applause filled the air, loud and heartfelt. Some guests even stood, moved by what they had just experienced. Clara lowered her hands, her face calm, though her heart was racing. She stood and nodded politely, unsure what to do with the sudden rush of attention. The billionaire stepped forward, his voice carrying over the sound of the applause. "You've given us something priceless tonight," he said. His tone was sincere, softer than anyone had ever heard it. The guests quieted, watching the exchange. "This woman," he continued, turning to them, "reminds us that true talent, true beauty can exist in places we least expect." His words caught Clara off guard. She didn't know how to react. She wanted to thank him, but her throat felt tight. The guests clapped again, some coming up to her afterward to shake her hand or compliment her. She accepted their words graciously, though inside she still felt like the same person she had been. A cleaner, someone used to staying invisible. When the crowd finally thinned and the penthouse grew quiet again, Clara began tidying up as she always did. The billionaire remained by the window, looking out over the city lights. After a while, he turned toward her and said, "Do you ever wonder why you stopped playing?" Clara paused. The question struck something deep within her. She set down the cloth she was holding and looked at the piano before answering. "Life," she said simply. "It just happened. There were things to take care of, responsibilities. Music doesn't pay the bills." He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "And yet it seems to have never left you." She smiled faintly. "No, I guess it never really does." There was a long pause. The billionaire seemed lost in thought, and then he said something that surprised her. "Would you let me help you?" Clara frowned slightly. "Help me?" "Yes," he said. "You deserve to play where people can truly hear you, not just in this room. You should be on a stage in front of the world." She shook her head gently. "I'm not sure I belong there. I'm not trained like others. I don't even have my own piano." "Then we'll fix that," he said immediately, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Clara looked at him, unsure whether to laugh or believe him. He was serious, though. There was a warmth in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. It wasn't pity, it was respect. "You don't have to," she said quietly. "I know," he replied, "but I want to." From that day forward, things began to shift again. A piano was delivered to her small apartment, a beautiful instrument with a polished surface and a sound that filled her home with life. She would play after work, losing track of time, her music flowing through the walls into the street outside. People passing by would sometimes stop and listen, their faces softening at the sound. The billionaire would occasionally visit, not as a boss but as a quiet admirer of her music. They would talk sometimes about life, about choices, about how strange it was that two people from such different worlds could share something so meaningful. Clara began to see a different side of him. Beneath the layers of wealth and arrogance, there was a man who had once loved music too, who had played as a child but stopped when life demanded other things. One evening, he asked her to teach him again. It was almost humorous to see someone so powerful sit awkwardly at a piano, trying to remember the placement of his fingers. Clara guided him gently, her voice soft and encouraging. For the first time in a long time, he laughed. Not the polite laugh he used at parties, but a genuine one. Days turned into weeks, and Clara's music began to spread beyond the walls of the penthouse. Someone had recorded one of her performances, and the video had found its way online. Within days, thousands of people were watching, commenting, sharing. They were moved by her story, the cleaner who played like a master, the woman whose talent had gone unnoticed until chance had brought it to light. When Clara found out, she was overwhelmed. She didn't know what to think. The attention was strange, but the messages she received from people touched her deeply. Many said her music had inspired them to chase their own forgotten dreams, to try again despite life's challenges. That more than anything filled her heart with joy. The billionaire saw the video too. He watched it several times, each time feeling a quiet pride he could not explain. He had started this as a careless joke, a challenge meant to entertain. But what had come from it was something genuine, something that humbled him. He realized that Clara had changed him without even trying. She had reminded him of something simple but profound, that beauty, talent, and grace exist far beyond the boundaries of wealth and status. One night, as Clara finished another piece at the penthouse, the guests applauded softly. But the billionaire didn't join them right away. He was lost in thought, watching her with quiet admiration. When she stood and smiled, he said something that made her pause. "You know," he said with a half smile, "I think I meant what I said that first night." Clara frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He met her eyes. "That if you played that piano, I'd marry you." The words hung between them, gentle, not as a challenge this time, but as something real. Clara's face flushed, but she didn't laugh or dismiss it. There was something honest in his tone, something that made her heart skip a beat. She didn't answer right away, but the look in her eyes said more than words ever could. The night ended quietly, with music still lingering in the air and something unspoken growing between them, a bond that had started as a game but had turned into something neither of them had planned, and while Clara didn't know what the future would bring, one thing was certain. The music had changed everything. Days turned into weeks, and the video of the cleaner playing the piano in the billionaire's penthouse continued to circulate everywhere. It spread far beyond the walls of his mansion. People who had never cared for classical music suddenly found themselves moved by the way she played. Her touch was soft yet powerful, and the emotion behind every note seemed to tell a story of quiet struggles and deep memories. The billionaire, once known for his arrogance and shallow charm, couldn't stop thinking about her. He had seen so many people perform, from famous musicians to artists from around the world, but none of them had stirred something real inside him. There was something about the way she played, how she closed her eyes, how she seemed to forget everyone around her, that left him restless. Every morning, when he passed through the large marble hallway, he noticed her cleaning quietly, just as before. She never brought up what had happened that night or the attention her music was now getting. She was still the same, humble, gentle, and always lost in her work. He admired that about her. While everyone else tried to impress him, she seemed to have no interest in what he thought of her. One day he approached her as she was dusting near the window. "You should play again," he said, trying to sound casual. She paused, glanced up at him, and smiled politely. "I think once was enough," she replied softly. He shook his head. "You don't understand. People want to hear you. I've had calls from charity organizers and event planners. They want you to perform," she frowned. "I'm just a cleaner, sir. I can't stand in front of crowds and play. It's not my world." He looked at her for a moment, realizing she genuinely believed that. "Maybe it's time to change that," he said quietly before walking away. That night, he sat in his private study looking at the city lights outside. For the first time, he felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with money or business. He wanted to help her, not out of pity or guilt, but because he believed in her talent. She had something that couldn't be bought or taught, a kind of magic that touched people's hearts. The next morning, he arranged for a small charity event in one of his hotels. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a gathering of local guests with music and dinner to raise funds for orphaned children. He asked her to play, promising that it would be simple, that she didn't have to be nervous. At first, she refused. The idea of standing in front of strangers terrified her, but as the days went by, she couldn't shake the memory of how it felt to play again, the sense of peace, the way the music seemed to take her pain away. After much thought, she finally agreed. The night of the charity event came. The ballroom glowed with golden lights, and people in elegant clothes filled the space with laughter and chatter. The billionaire greeted guests, but his eyes often wandered toward the stage where the piano sat waiting. When she finally appeared, dressed modestly in a soft blue gown, the room quieted. She took a deep breath, sat at the piano, and began to play. The moment her fingers touched the keys, the room seemed to fade away. Every note was alive, full of emotion and honesty. Some guests closed their eyes, others simply stared, captivated. Even the waiters stopped for a brief moment, listening in silence. When the song ended, there was no sound for a few seconds, only the faint echo of the last note. Then the applause came, strong and sincere. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. She looked up, surprised, her cheeks flushed. The billionaire stood at the back of the room, smiling quietly. That performance changed everything. Invitations began to pour in from everywhere. Concert halls, charity events, even television programs. But she didn't rush into fame. She took it slow, balancing her work and her music. She often said that the piano wasn't a tool for fame, but a way to express her heart. The billionaire began spending more time with her. Sometimes he would sit near the piano as she practiced after work, not saying a word. Other times they would share quiet conversations about life. He learned that she had once dreamed of becoming a pianist, but had given it up when her father fell ill. She had worked multiple jobs to support her family, never returning to her passion. Listening to her story, he realized how much she had sacrificed. He had lived his whole life chasing more wealth while she had given up her dreams for love and duty. It made him reflect deeply on what truly mattered. One afternoon, he invited her to his private villa outside the city. There, in the middle of a large room filled with sunlight, stood a brand-new piano. "It's yours," he said simply. She stared at him, her eyes wide. "I can't accept that," she whispered. He smiled. "It's not a gift. It's a start." You've given me more than you realize. You reminded me what it means to feel something real again." She hesitated, then touched the piano gently, almost reverently. "Thank you," she said quietly. From that day on, her music became a regular part of his world. He found himself waiting for those moments when she played, the way the melodies softened his heart. He stopped hosting shallow parties and instead began supporting local musicians and community projects. People around him noticed the change. The once cold businessman had become warmer, more grounded. As their friendship grew, so did their understanding of each other. He admired her humility. She respected his willingness to change. They laughed more often, shared meals, and sometimes sat in comfortable silence. He would ask her about her favorite songs, and she would tell him about the pieces that carried special meaning in her life. One evening, after she finished playing a particularly emotional song, he spoke softly. "You know, when I made that joke about marrying whoever played this piano, I never thought it would lead to this." She looked at him, smiling shyly. "And what is this exactly?" He chuckled, his eyes gentle. "Peace. I think I found peace because of you." Her smile deepened, though she said nothing. But inside, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She had never imagined that her music could touch someone so deeply, especially a man who seemed untouchable by emotions. As weeks passed, the world outside began to see them together, at charity events, small concerts, and gatherings. Rumors spread quickly, as they always do, but neither of them paid attention. Their connection was not built on attention or gossip. It was quiet, genuine, and steady. She still cleaned the penthouse on some days, saying it helped her stay grounded. He didn't try to stop her. Instead, he often joined her, walking around, asking her about her music. The staff found it strange but endearing. The billionaire who once never noticed the people working for him now took the time to know them, to thank them. One evening, he received a message from a major concert hall. They wanted her to perform for an international audience. It was a huge opportunity, but it also came with pressure. When he told her about it, she hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she said. He took her hand gently. "You're ready. You've been ready for a long time. The world needs to hear what you have to say through your music." She looked at him for a long moment before nodding. "Then I'll do it," she whispered. The night of the concert arrived. The grand hall was filled with people from all walks of life, businessmen, artists, journalists, and even children who had been inspired by her story. She walked onto the stage, her hands trembling slightly, but when she saw him in the front row, smiling reassuringly, the fear melted away. She began to play, and as the music filled the hall, people listened in awe. It was as if her soul had found its true voice. When the final note ended, the applause was thunderous. She stood, overwhelmed, as tears filled her eyes. After the performance, the billionaire joined her backstage. Without saying much, he simply embraced her, whispering, "You did it." That night marked a new beginning for both of them. For her, it was the start of a long journey toward fulfilling her dreams. For him, it was a lesson in humility, kindness, and the power of genuine connection. He realized that all his wealth and luxury had never brought him the happiness he found in those quiet moments by the piano. Listening to her play, she had given him something priceless, the understanding that love, respect, and passion are the real treasures of life. And though he had once laughed and made a careless bet, now he looked at her not as a cleaner or a performer, but as someone who had completely changed the rhythm of his heart. The days after the grand concert were unlike anything either of them had expected. Her performance had touched so many people that newspapers and TV channels wanted to know her story. But she didn't rush into interviews or publicity. She preferred quiet mornings and small performances that truly connected with the audience. For her, music was never about fame. It was about feeling, about healing, about life itself. The billionaire watched this new chapter of her life with quiet pride. He didn't take credit for any of it, though deep down he felt honored to have played a small part in her journey. The woman who once cleaned his floors now stood on stages where people listened with tears in their eyes. But even with all the attention, she remained humble. She still greeted the staff when she visited the mansion. She still smiled the same way she used to when she carried cleaning supplies down the long hallways. One morning he found her sitting at the same piano where it had all begun. The sunlight touched her face and her fingers moved gently across the keys. The melody she played was soft, almost like a whisper. When she noticed him standing at the doorway, she stopped and smiled. "I didn't expect anyone to be here this early," she said. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted, walking closer. "Every time I hear you play, it reminds me of that first night. The night I made a foolish joke." She laughed lightly. "The night that changed everything, you mean?" He nodded, smiling. "Yes, that too." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the echo of the last note. The air between them felt calm but full of unspoken things. He wanted to tell her how deeply he admired her, how much she had changed him, but words never seemed enough. Instead, he asked, "Do you ever regret playing that night?" She shook her head slowly. "Not for a moment. I think some things are meant to happen, even if they start as a joke. If you hadn't said those words, I might never have touched a piano again." Her words struck him deeply. He realized how strange life could be, how a single careless sentence could lead to something so beautiful. As the weeks passed, they spent more time together. Sometimes they went for long walks near the gardens, talking about music, childhood dreams, and life's strange turns. He told her stories from his early years, how he had built his empire, the mistakes he made, the people he had lost along the way. She listened quietly, never judging, only nodding with understanding. She told him how she used to practice on an old, broken piano when she was little, and how her mother would hum along while cooking. Those memories were precious to her, and he could see the emotion in her eyes when she spoke. One evening, as they sat together by the window, he said softly, "You know, I used to think that wealth could fix anything. But now I see that peace doesn't come from what we own. It comes from what we feel." She smiled, looking out at the skyline. "Maybe that's something you had to discover for yourself." He nodded. "With your help." The connection between them had grown strong, though neither had spoken openly about it. They didn't need to. The care was in the small things, the way she saved him a seat near the piano, the way he waited for her after every performance, the way their eyes met and spoke silently. One afternoon, he arranged something special. Without telling her, he invited a few people from her old neighborhood, people who had known her before her life changed. They gathered in a small concert hall that he owned but rarely used. When she walked in and saw the familiar faces, her eyes filled with tears. "I thought you might want to play for them," he said gently. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed. "You brought them here?" He smiled softly. "I thought they deserved to see the woman you've become." That evening was one of the most emotional performances of her life. She played for the people who had seen her struggle, the ones who had shared her simple beginnings. Every note carried memories of laughter, hardship, and hope. When she finished, many were crying. Even he couldn't hold back his emotions. After everyone left, she turned to him, eyes shining. "You didn't have to do this, but I'll never forget it." He stepped closer, looking into her eyes. "You've given me something far greater. You reminded me what it means to live with purpose." She looked down shyly, unsure what to say. There was a pause, long and warm, before he continued. "You remember the first words I said to you? About playing the piano and marrying you?" Her cheeks flushed, and she laughed softly. "How could I forget? You sounded so sure of yourself back then." He smiled gently. "I was a fool that day. But maybe fate used that foolishness to lead me here, to you." The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock. She looked at him, seeing something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He wasn't the same man she had met months ago. The arrogance was gone. What remained was sincerity and warmth. He took a deep breath and said, "I wasn't joking anymore. I meant what I said, not because of your talent, but because of who you are. You've shown me a kind of strength I never had. You've taught me what kindness and grace really mean." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she smiled, her eyes soft. "You changed too," she whispered. "And that's worth more than anything else." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring, not flashy or extravagant, just simple and elegant. "Would you give me the honor of making that joke come true?" Her eyes filled with tears. She covered her mouth, then nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered. He slipped the ring on her finger as the piano light reflected softly around them. There were no cameras, no crowd, no applause, only two people who had found something rare and real. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet happiness. Their story spread again, but this time, people admired it not for its surprise ending, but for its truth. It wasn't about a rich man marrying a poor woman. It was about two souls who had changed each other's lives in ways money or fame never could. After their small wedding, they spent time traveling together. But no matter where they went, she always carried her music. She played in small towns, hospitals, schools, and community centers. She said her music belonged to everyone, not just to fancy halls. He always went with her, sitting quietly in the audience, smiling every time she looked his way. Life became peaceful. Their home was filled with laughter and music instead of noise and parties. Sometimes she would play while he worked nearby, and he would pause just to listen. It reminded him every day of how far they had come. Years later, people still talked about their story. About the cleaner who played the piano so beautifully that a billionaire changed his heart. About the man who learned that love and respect were worth more than gold. But to them, it wasn't a story at all. It was just life. Ordinary, gentle, and full of gratitude. One evening, as the sun set behind their garden, she sat by the piano and began to play the same melody she had played that first night long ago. He stood nearby, watching her, remembering every moment that led them here. When the last note faded, she turned to him and said softly, "Do you ever think about how it all started?" He smiled, walking closer. "Every day. And I still can't believe how lucky I was that you picked up that bet." She laughed quietly. "I guess you were right about one thing," she teased. "Playing that piano did change my life." He took her hand gently. "It changed mine more." They sat together as the light faded, the room warm with memories and love. The piano stood between them, not as a symbol of wealth or talent, but as a reminder of fate, kindness, and the power of one simple moment to change everything. And as she began to play once more, her music filled the air like a heartbeat, steady and full of life. For anyone listening outside that room, it was just another beautiful tune. But for them, it was the sound of a promise that had come true. The promise of love born not from wealth or power, but from the simple courage to play one song from the heart.